look at where this CO2 is coming from. Coming from oil, gas, and coal. Oil and gas are already, we've used a significant fraction of how much is estimated to remain in the ground. There are some uncertainty as to how much remains to be discovered. Coal, again, there's uncertainty about how much there is, but there's enough to cause us to have incredible climate changes. Now, the one, looking at it from a global standpoint, you may not think so from Australia's perspective, but coal is the one thing that could be left in the ground. The oil and gas are owned mainly by Russia and Saudi Arabia. They are, and we're using them at a rate that clearly we're going to use the large pools of oil that are existing are going to be burned. But if we phased out coal use over the next 20 years, then the CO2 amount would peak and begin to decline at about by the middle of the century, depending upon how big these reservoirs of oil and gas are. And with improved forestry and agricultural practices, we could draw down the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere back below 350 parts per million this century. So it's technically feasible if we phased out coal rapidly. But it also means that we could not burn unconventional fossil fuels like tar sands and tar shale. And in order to get back to 350 at a reasonable time, we also should not be going after every last drop of oil in the most extreme environments on the planet. But what's really happening? Well, in the United States, we just signed an agreement with Canada to bring tar sands oil to the United States. And even are developing oil shale, and we're building more coal-fired power plants. And of course, in Australia, they're actually planning to expand the port facility so they can export more coal. So there's no movement in that direction of phasing out coal by any means. There is, in fact, a huge gap between the rhetoric and the reality. The political leaders say that we have a planet in peril and we need to take actions to deal with that, but in fact the actions don't correspond to that at all. It's more a case of greenwash, where they say the right words, but nobody will stand up and say exactly what is really needed in order to solve the problem. And these, the Kyoto Protocol, for example, the emissions were 1.5% per year before 1997. After that, they've been increasing 3% per year. And Copenhagen was talking about the same type of scheme. So here's the emissions, and you can see that the rate of growth in this decade has been much higher than previously. The problem is, and this is the most fundamental point, as long as fossil fuels are the cheapest energy, we're going to continue to use them. And we're just kidding ourselves that we can put a cap, that any cap has any effect. The reason that they're the cheapest energy is we don't, first of all, we subsidize them in many cases, and secondly, we don't make them pay for their costs to society, to the damage they do to human health, to the environment, and to the future that will be inherited by our children. So the solution, the only solution that's going to work is to put a gradually rising price on carbon emissions. And you also, you need to have efficiency regulations, and you need to have technology development so there's some alternatives. But the most important thing is the price on carbon, because that's what will drive the technology development. Entrepreneurs are not eager to develop something as long as there's cheaper fossil fuels available. So what I say is we need to put a fee. It has to be a very simple system, not the kind of convoluted things which the special interests are able to torque in their favor, but just put a fee across the board on carbon at oil, coal, and gas, and have that fee gradually rising. And the only way the public will allow the fee to rise to a high enough level that it affects their lifestyles and their choices is to have the money not go to special interests and not have Congress decide how they're going to spend this money, but to give the money to the public on a per capita basis. I think it should be mainly in the form of a monthly green check or electronic deposit to their bank account or debit card. And so the person that uses less than average will actually make money on the process. It could be that some of the money would be given back in the form of a payroll tax deduction, and that's the one experiment where this has been tried in British Columbia. They did it that way. They reduced the payroll taxes, and the public liked it. When the law was passed, within 4 months, it was in effect and working smoothly. And the public re-elected that government when that became the big issue in the next election because the public liked it. But I think it would actually be sensible to use half of it for payroll tax deduction and half of it for a green check because half the people are not employed. Either they're retired or they're unemployed involuntarily, or they're self-employed in a way that they're not on a payroll. For example, in the United States, and Australia and Canada would be very similar because the use of fossil fuels is almost the same in those 3 countries. By the time the fee gets to the equivalent of $1 a gallon on gasoline, that's, in the United States, generates a huge amount of money, $670 billion given our fossil fuel use last year. And it's not, of course, that much in Australia, but per capita it would be about the same. So it's a lot of money. If you distribute it to legal residents, it's at least a couple of $1,000s per year by the time it gets to that level. And that's beginning to be enough of a price signal that it would affect economic decisions. The fee and dividend has a number of effects. It stimulates the economy. It puts money in the hand of the public. It addresses the fossil fuel addiction, and it solves the climate problem. The cap and trade, there is no way that that can work globally. There's no chance that China and India will accept a cap on their economy. And why should they? Their fossil fuel use per capita is 10 times less, several times less for China and 20 times less than in India than in the United States or Australia. They're not going to accept a cap, and they've made that very clear. But they are willing to consider a fee, a tax on carbon, which they would collect themselves and, of course, keep the money and decide how they're going to use it. But they don't want to go down the path that the United States did, where we become addicted to fossil fuels and have to protect a supply line around the world with the military. There are other, cap and trade is a system that was designed by big banks because they want to be in this trading business. It'd be a multi-trillion-dollar per year business, and they're going to make money. They've got skilled trading units. And where do their profits come from and their operating costs? They come from increases in the energy price. So the public pays these banks more money. There are other disadvantages. So, on the other hand, a fee and dividend approach it also has it can be made universal, and it can be used. By the way, it requires, in the case of a cap, you need to get 200 countries to agree to it. And what we found is that each country has to be negotiated with. That's why countries like Russia ended up with just a total windfall in the Kyoto Protocol. But with with a fee and dividend, with a carbon tax, what's really required is the United States and China to agree, because Europe would certainly go along with it. And then countries that don't want to have a carbon tax, you would put a border tax on products imported from those countries that are made with fossil fuels. And the World Trade Organization already allows that type of border tax. And then those countries actually would quickly agree to a tax, because they'd rather collect that money themselves rather than you collecting it from them. So what's the problem? Well, fossil fuels are still the lowest price. We're not able to institute a fee on them. Governments are under the thumb of fossil fuel industry, in my opinion. And there's a revolving door between Washington and Wall Street. There's a revolving door between Congress and lobbyists. Congress people think they have the right to retire and then start to make a lot of money as lobbyists. Unfortunately, money talks in capitals all around the world. And the intergenerational issue, the founding fathers in America understood and considered it self-evident that we use the planet, we're borrowing it from the next generations, and we're obligated to give it to the next generations in equally good condition. Native people talk about the obligations to future generations. And most religious groups feel that there's a duty to preserve creation. Until the public gets involved, it doesn't seem that our government wants to take the actions that are needed. So this is my newest grandchild, getting back to this question of intergenerational inequity. Jake he was 11 months old when I took this photo. He's now 2 years old. So my parents lived to be almost 90 years old, so he will probably be around for most of the century, and will feel the full effects of what we do or don't do. What do we do about the situation that we have, which I think has become very clear? We have to try to influence our governments. That's not easy, because they operate on short election cycles, and they seem to be influenced by the special interests. The courts maybe offer some hope, because at least there's a common law that we are enjoying the use of property that belongs to future generations. But that's going to be difficult. I think that the public, this is a moral issue, analogous to some prior cases, the civil rights, and it's probably necessary for the people to get involved and to begin to put more pressure on the government. But as yet, this is pretty far down the line on most people's concerns because of the long time scale of it. I wanted to ask a couple of I will open it up to questions shortly, but I thought I would ask a couple of questions myself, which are commonly asked. This one was actually asked by the NASA administrator, my boss's boss's boss, who said, on National Public Radio, said, "Why should we be concerned about human-made climate change? There have been much larger changes during the Earth's history." And of course, that's true. But if you look at those changes, that actually is our best source of